From the outside, my house looked like every other home on the street, warm lights in the windows, flowers in the garden, a man everyone respected at the head of it all. But step inside, and you'd see the truth. A prison built not of walls, but of control. And a father who thought love was weakness. And the worst injustice? It wasn't in the rules he forced on me. It was in the love he refused to give. If you've ever dreamed of standing up to someone who tried to silence you, hit that like button, subscribe, and stick with me, because this is the story of how one father's control planted the seeds of rebellion, and how I turned his injustice into the sweetest revenge. I was 16, the age when freedom begins to taste real, when dreams start forming pictures of the future. My friends were discovering who they wanted to be. Some dreamed of medicine, others of art, some even of leaving town and carving their own path. But me? My dreams didn't belong to me. Every decision, what I wore, who I spoke to, even how often I smiled, belonged to him, my father. To the world, he was a role model. Neighbors bowed their heads when he passed. Shopkeepers greeted him with respect. Parents told their kids, learn discipline like him. But behind our closed doors, that discipline became a chain wrapped tight around my throat. When he walked into a room, silence followed. His voice wasn't loud by accident, it was loud by design. It filled every corner, left no space for anyone else's opinion. I still remember the way my heart would race when he cleared his throat. That sound alone meant, don't argue, don't resist, don't even breathe too loud. There's one night that split my world in two, before and after. It was our school's annual ceremony. Weeks earlier, I had entered an essay competition. For the first time, I had poured every thought, every secret hope, every piece of my soul into words. Writing became my quiet rebellion, my way of saying things I wasn't allowed to speak. When they called my name as the winner, applause filled the hall. Teachers beamed with pride. Classmates looked at me differently, as if for once I wasn't just the quiet girl with strict parents. I was someone. And in that moment, the only thing I wanted more than the certificate, more than the stage, was to see my father's face light up with pride. I found him in the crowd, but his face was stone. No smile, no clapping, no pride. Later, in the car, when silence weighed heavy between us, he finally spoke. His words weren't just cold, they were a blade. All this, it doesn't matter. Girls don't need trophies. They need to learn obedience. Obedience. That was all I was worth to him. The applause of hundreds meant nothing. His approval, the one thing I longed for, was a locked door I would never open. That night, something in me cracked. It wasn't the punishment. It wasn't the control. It was the realization that my father would never see me, never love me for who I truly was. After that, I stopped trying. No more essays. No more sharing my ideas at school. No more hoping he'd be proud. I learned to bury my laughter, to swallow my words, to dim my light. Because in his world, my brightness had no place. But here's the thing about injustice. It doesn't kill the soul. It plants seeds. Seeds of quiet rage. Seeds of strength. Every time he silenced me, I built an inner world louder than his voice. Every time he denied me love, I carved a promise into my heart. One day, I will never deny it to another soul. I began to notice things. Small cracks in his armor. The way neighbors praised him, but flinched when he walked away. The way my mother's silence wasn't respect, it was survival. He thought he was untouchable, but I was learning, watching, waiting. The turning point came months later. My father had been boasting to relatives about his perfect family. He spoke of how disciplined I was, how I never caused trouble, how his strict rules had shaped me into the ideal daughter. They praised him, called him a role model, patted his back, and I sat there quiet, burning inside. Because the truth was, I wasn't his success story. I was his prisoner. That night, I realized something powerful. If he denied me freedom, then my revenge would be to take it back. If he denied me love, then my revenge would be to love myself louder than he ever could silence me. But revenge, it couldn't just be rebellion. It had to be undeniable. It had to be something he could never control, never erase, never dismiss with a single sentence. So I began planning, and that was the beginning of the end of his control. When I decided revenge would be my reclaiming of life, I promised myself two things: it would never be violent, and it would never be petty. My justice would be undeniable. It would be truth, served cold and steady. The kind of truth you can't clap away or dismiss with a pat on the back. The first weapon I had was the one he never thought mattered: words. Writing had been my private rebellion. I wrote in the margins of notebooks on scraps of paper, until my handwriting looked like a map of wounds and survival. I wrote because words were things he could not confiscate. They followed me like light. So I began to write more deliberately. I applied for a National Essay Prize, a competition judged by educators and journalists, announced months earlier. I wrote not the triumphant, decorative piece they expected, but a raw, careful portrait of childhood under control. I described the small injustices, the way his hand hovered over my shoulder like a judge's gavel, the ways my mother's laughter had been taught to be quiet, the ceremony where my trophy meant nothing to him. But I did not write to shame him alone. I wrote for dozens of girls like me, for every girl whose life had been edited by someone else's idea of honor. I wrote so that the room filled with strangers might feel what I had felt for years, the pinch of being unseen. When the judges announced finalists, my heart hammered so loud I thought they might hear it in their office. I didn't tell anyone. It had to be clean, without his interference. The fewer people who knew, the purer the reveal would be. And then the email came. I won. They wanted me to read the winning piece at a televised education summit. The summit had invited local leaders, principals, council members, and by coincidence, my father's name was on the list of attendees. He'd been invited as a community pillar to receive a commendation for family leadership. It felt like someone had given me a stage and handed me the microphone they once used to silence me. I rehearsed until the words tasted true in my mouth. I practiced my breath. I practiced looking at the audience and not at the seat where he would sit, though a small, rebellious part of me hoped to catch the exact moment his face faltered. The night of the summit, the auditorium smelled of polished wood and coffee. Suit jackets whispered as people settled. Cameras blinked red. My palms sweated against the paper of my speech. I could hear 1,000 small noises, coughs, a phone being silenced, the hollow rattle of my own breath. When they called my name, applause softened into focus. I stepped up, the lights pressing warm on my skin, and for a second, I saw only the black beyond the stage, that blank that used to swallow me. Then I remembered why I'd come, not to hurt, but to expose what had been hidden. I did not begin with accusations. I began with a scene. I remember a father who clapped for my younger brother's grades, but whose hands were closed for my trophies. I said, voice steady. I remember the smell of my school uniform after rehearsals, and how I pressed the paper certificate to my chest like a secret talisman. I remember believing that if I kept quiet long enough, I would be invisible, and that would be safe. The audience leaned in. I described the ceremony, the stone face in the crowd. I spoke of obedience as a currency he had invested in, and how that investment had destroyed other kinds of value: trust, warmth, the small currency of a smile. I let the room feel the tension. I described, with the precision of someone who had rehearsed feeling as rigorously as words, the physical shocks, the pins of anger behind my ribs, the way my throat tightened when he called obedience more important than love. I let my listeners taste the iron of that injustice. Then I did something I had not allowed myself to do in years. I turned my fury into invitation. I am not here to tear him down, I said, watching the cameras. I am here to ask every parent in this room, what are you building with your discipline? Are you building strength or silence? After the reading, the program moved to commendations. One by one, local leaders were called to the stage. My father's name was announced with the same reverent cadence he relied on in our home. He rose with that practiced pride, shoulders squared, the armor of public approval reflecting the stage lights. When they handed him the plaque for family leadership, the applause was robust, measured, approving. He smiled that predatory smile men like him used to confirm their dominion. He did not look at me. Then the summit's moderator stepped forward with a surprise. A local newspaper had run a feature about the event and had printed excerpts from the winning essay. The moderator said casually, "We'd like to invite the author to the stage for a short Q&A." My heart leapt a rhythm that sounded like threat and promise. I stood and walked across the stage with my palms still damp. The microphone felt like a talisman in my hand now. "Your essay was powerful," the moderator said, turning to the audience. You speak about the difference between discipline and control. Would you like to say anything to the parents here tonight? I looked at the rows of faces, proud, polite, unsuspecting, and then at my father. He looked smaller in the harshness of the stage lights. The practiced composure finally squeezed thin. I did what I had practiced for months. I love my father, I said. The room shifted, and I have spent years wanting him to love me back. I kept thinking if I excelled, if I followed the right lines, he would finally see me. But he saw the outline of what he wanted, obedience, not me. The applause that followed was an automatic social reflex, polite. But then I did the thing that stopped. The polite chatter and made breath, catching throats. I want to ask him here, in front of everyone, I said, voice now both gentle and hard as glass. When you told me trophies don't matter, did you ever think what they meant to me? When you taught me obedience as virtue, did you ever think you were teaching me to disappear? A hush fell. Conversations stalled like trains. My father's jaw worked. His eyes found me, then slid away. He reached for the practiced defense, a small, thin laugh, trying to recast my words as drama. You're making this personal, he said, low. No, I answered, calm. This is public. It's about what your idea of honor costs other people. I named the facts, his dismissive comment at the ceremony. The way he had told relatives that discipline was worth more than feelings. The tiny humiliations that had built into a monolith. I did not scream. I did not hurl invective. I spoke the truth with scalpel precision. The auditorium's temperature changed. Heads turned. Some faces betrayed recognition, neighbors, who had felt something similar, but had not had language. One woman in the front row reached for her child's hand as if the story had been meant for them too. My father's expression fractured. The public armor had been scored. He tried to answer, to retake the narrative. I only wanted what was best. For whom? I asked. The room exhaled. He had no script. His voice, once thunder, now faltered like a radio cutting in and out. The plaque in his hands, his symbol of respect, felt, suddenly, like a paper crown on a man, with no kingdom left to rule. When he finally left the stage, his steps were not confident. The people who once admired him avoided meeting his eyes. Whispers followed him like an unfamiliar tale. My mother watched from the audience, a slow smile breaking like thawed ice. She later told me it was the first time she had felt safe to breathe in years. I don't tell you this to gloat. I tell you this because justice sometimes is the illumination of truth. My revenge was not the collapse of a man. It was the unmasking of a fraud. It was the moment, the quiet things I had carried for years became visible in a room where people could no longer ignore them. When I walked off the stage, people came to me. Some cried, others hugged me with utter strangers. Intensity, because my story had opened a door for their own voices. A school counselor asked if I'd help start a program for girls to speak out. A journalist requested a follow-up piece. Invitations arrived, to speak, to write, to teach. My life turned into a different currency, one of influence, of platform, of the ability to change others' narratives. My father never publicly apologized. He retreated into a smaller orbit, muttering about pride and tradition. For a while, he tried to reclaim control in petty ways, a cold dinner here, a curt remark there. But the world he had depended on for applause had shifted. Respect, once automatic, required more than stern looks. People asked questions they had never asked. I forgave him, not because he deserved it, but because forgiveness unchained me. Forgiveness did not mean I accepted what he'd done. It meant I refused to let his cruelty shape my future. I set boundaries. I learned what love sounded like when it was given freely. And I practiced giving that love to myself. I used my platform to start the program the counselor had suggested. A community writing workshop for girls. We met in a dusty classroom on Thursdays, where girls learned to give voice to buried things. They wrote letters to unsent fathers, to the children they hoped to become, to the versions of themselves that had been silenced. They read aloud, and sometimes the room hummed with the sound of breaking open, the sound of small, necessary revolutions. Sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't revenge at all. It's the life you build after being wronged. It's the words you speak when you finally have the room to speak them. It's the kindness you give yourself after years without it. My father denied me his love, but in the space he left behind, I planted a different harvest, courage, compassion, and a voice that would no longer be quieted. If this story moved you, hit like and subscribe and tell me in the comments. What's the bravest thing you've ever done to reclaim your life? If you know someone who needs to hear this, share it. And if you're holding a silence that's heavy, write it down tonight. You'll be surprised what happens when you let the truth out.